we've seen. What does that mean? What does it mean for the people? So let's get on with it. Like everybody else, I think all of us were shocked when learning of the news of maybe Floyd Shivambu moving towards MK. And South Africans, we suddenly on social media became experts of body language and many other things. Now, I've been in political parties. I understand how political parties in some ways work. I can remember I was in the city of Johannesburg in just before an election in 2014. And often what used to happen is the ANC at the time used to find a way of recruiting DA councillors. And no, I'm not wearing blue because I'm missing anything. I'm just telling you about a period of time that was happening. And what used to happen often is that we would arrive at council meetings and then you had these councillors stand up in the meeting and announce their newfound love of the ANC. They'd literally get up and resign, to much jubilation to the ANC, and often to kind of like the demoralizing of your own troops. I hate to say this, but that wasn't the worst. The worst is often the witch hunt that happens after that. Because what used to happen in caucus meetings is that you'd sit in caucus meetings and begin to talk to colleagues and say, hey, what are you leaving? Who's leaving next? And all of that. And it was never on principle. It was often just about positions and all of that. But what it aimed and successfully managed to do is to destabilize politics, destabilize your own organization. So I think in some ways there's a sense in me that is more, that has that sense of compassion when I think about where the EFF's state is at. But I think the bigger issue that we've got to think about as South Africans is, what are we doing about the realignment, or maybe in some ways making sure our politics mature beyond this point? I happen to think that we're going to see more of it happen. We're going to see people maybe in some ways who might agree on ideas work together. We're going to see the dynamics in the next number of years of parties merging, some parties breaking up, new leaders joining other parties, etc., etc. And the thing that maybe in this moment we need to prep ourselves for as citizens is just a few things. The first thing is, this is all a natural part of moving away from liberation politics. Our liberation was led by leaders, and people used to say, I'm following this one and all of that, we oppose this. And so it is marinated and seized with racial politics and polarization of that sense. What I think we need to do is enter into shared ideas and what are the interests that we want to see in the country. So parties that agree on the constitution, agree on how the economy must work, what does it mean to be an ethical leader or not, need to begin to work together. And I think that's going to start to happen more and more. I think what we've got to rebuild in this country is what informs the centrist caucus. Those South Africans who say, we live in a multiracial society. We want to see a South Africa where races work together, the defense of the constitution, the idea of saying, how do we have a mixed market economy? How do we defend and make sure that government is closest to the people and it works for the people? How do we give a future upon which all citizens can feel comfortable that they can serve in? That's what we've got to answer the question. And for that to happen, the old must die and the new must come. The reality of it is that many of the leaders we're debating and we're seeing, their time will come and will go. We're going to see more of them in some ways. Naturally, no one can live forever. I mean, and I don't wish ill on anyone. I'm just merely saying that no organization, no all of that lives in eternity. So as naturally, you enter a new generation, as a new generational mission. How is that generation going to coalesce? Surely that generation of leaders, our generation of leaders, can't be answering questions of our parents' future or pontificating on a better yesterday. We need to be coalescing on a different tomorrow. Those leaders, I bump into them in parliament. They are in their 40s, 50s. They are coming together to answer questions about, listen, guys, we've got to solve for the problems of our generation and future generations. We're confronting issues of unemployment, confronting issues of climate change, confronting issues of how democracy itself is working. These are real and genuine questions about the future. They mature us away from where we maybe have been. And so, to me, this moment, speaks to, at some level, there's a realignment on the left as those political parties are trying to figure out what they're going to do. They may configure themselves as this progressive caucus. Their politics, in some ways, on the right, as you think about what the ANC and GNU and all of that is happening. What must emerge is whether the center will hold and produce a new set of reconfiguration. That, in my hope and my belief as parties that sit in the center, is that that presents a credible future for where this country needs to go. It's a future I would prefer. It's a future where citizens from different walks of life can work together. And what's become exciting for me since the news of what's happening with Floyd and the EFF is that more and more people are saying, as that is going on, how is the reorganization of the center happening? And that's an exciting project that we must be engaged with and make sure. So I think all of it is healthy. I know many people are saying, hey, what does it mean? Is it staged? Is it all of that? I don't buy any of that stuff, man. I don't think any of it is staged. I think it's just the reality of people leaving. Is it painful? Is it hurtful? Of course it is. And every time leaders move and all of that, of course, it's disruptive to organizations. But more than anything, it posits a new frame of realignment. It posits a new opportunity for people who historically didn't work together, can work together for common interests and pursue what I think is going to be important for this country, which is post-liberation politics. Because the problem with liberation politics is that if you frame yourself as a liberation party, as Jacob Zuma stands up publicly and says he's here to liberate black people, I often wonder, what is he doing now that he was incapable of doing when he was president of the republic? I often think to myself, how do we connect governance and parties' ability to deliver on a mandate of a future for all citizens with elections? So that when citizens go vote, they give confidence to new ideals rather than simply just being stuck in this personality cult that ultimately says, we will vote for this leader, this person, regardless of their performance in government. I think we need to ask ourselves better. I think as a country, we can choose leaders that will take us forward. And I'm inviting you to say, let's really work hard at a new era, which is a new generation of leaders with a new competence that must go to parliament and legislatures, and a vision for tomorrow that can be executed by a new leadership cohort that is centrist. Because all over the world, when you look at the US elections, when you look at European elections, extremists are popping up everywhere, and it's doing two things. It's increasing voter participation, that's declining. Democracy itself is a different conversation. We've got to rebuild the center if we hope to hold things like the Constitution, things like how we look at our economies. If we got to build that, all of us have to participate and build it. This is not a time to be silent. I think the silent majority is spectators. We got to bring citizens to the polls with ideas. And it's difficult when you're operating in the center because the center finds it hard to be populist. But at the same time as that, the ideals that sit in the center need to remind us of what makes us who we are, and we must work together to build that center. And to that point, I think this week has been particularly tough for me. I got an interesting call from my mother. And my mother lives in Dobsonville in Soweto. She says this to me. She says, we have not had electricity for 3 days. Eskom sometimes introduces this policy of load reduction, which selects particular areas and they switch them off progressively. And it often is operational in poor communities, such as Soweto and many others. But I think what was difficult about that conversation is that as she called me, naturally I have a relationship with Minister Khosienzo Ramakgopa, the Minister of Electricity, and that whole cluster. But I realized that even in reaching out to him, it was too far removed for him to be able to deal with the issues of Dobsonville. And eventually we kind of come around to saying 3 days later, ESCOM is working, and eventually they try and fix the electricity issue. But issues of electricity in townships have been chronic. They've been going on. Since I was a child, I can remember a time where half the street would have electricity and the other half wouldn't. So what does it mean for the South Africa we live in? Because in truth, if you are in particularly wealthy areas, etc., some of these issues don't always affect you. And if they begin to do that, wealthier citizens are able to buy themselves out of government failures. They're able to say, if I have problems with healthcare, I will take my child to or take my family to a private doctor. If I have problems with security and the police don't respond, I can phone whatever the security company is, Pangela, ADT, all of them. If you've got problems with even education, you find private schooling, etc., or you pay higher for education to go to quintile 4 and 5 schools, etc. If you've got municipal problems and water, you find boreholes, or electricity, you find solar panels, etc. This is what wealthier citizens are doing. But I think this is the pain for me. Poorer citizens are suffering helplessness. More than 54% of our citizens are living below the upper poverty line. This is what this reality means. It means when there is a water problem, as I saw in Abeja, the municipality cannot respond. Where there's an electricity problem, people sit for days and eventually food in your fridge goes off. Where there are security problems, already now the Minister of Police has delayed in releasing crime stats. And the police often cannot even protect people. That's why people end up having to pay protection fees. And by another racketeering gangs who come and literally mess around in our communities by asking businesses, garages, service stations, all of those to pay protection fees. In what universe is that? And they equally so, if you've got problems with healthcare, you sometimes go to a clinic and the doctors are not there. So to me, this is the divisions of multiple South Africas. That is why when I go to Parliament, I fight day in, day out to say, it's not the money problems. It's about ensuring that actually we can deliver to that South Africa where citizens are wholly reliant on services of government. Those citizens collectively are dependent on ensuring that the lights do come on. That's why we must welcome what's been happening with the load shedding issue. But more than anything, we must drive harder. Every citizen in this country must be able to gain access to levels of electricity. They must be able to gain that. Today, we can't be debating communities that don't have water. Hammanskraal and the quality of water there. This cannot be. And therefore, we must ask ourselves better. Governance and delivery. Let's make sure that we've been asking, even in Parliament, that more and more must be done to the Ministry of Water so that we can deliver with proper planning and oversight quality water to citizens. That healthcare, today we've opened a whole concern in the sense that I've written to the Ministry of Health to say they must come and explain why there is a 77 billion rand cumulative expense on medical legal fees. Medical legal, and in that sense, this is negligence in the public sector. But often it's not just the doctors who are being negligent. You find infrastructural failures contribute to these issues when patients can't get the proper help. Now, when 77 billion rands goes towards that, it means we're not hiring more doctors. It means we're not being able to build more hospitals, etc. This is a fundamental issue that we've got to begin to fight against. And that's why today I've even asked the Minister of Health, and he's given me assurance that he's away. We were hoping to meet next week, but he will, when he returns from his trip overseas, I'm hoping he can be able to come and give us answers on this. And I've also written to the Auditor General as part of the Standing Committee on Appropriations to say, come and explain to us, how do we deal with this issue? Because if it continues, we're going to suffer in the public healthcare service. And our citizens who are feeling helpless end up with no services. It's the fight I've began even with the Ministry of Police to say, give us proper answers. Even in education, we've got to ensure that our young people are able to start school and finish school. And even in discussions with the Ministry of Education today, it became even more so that as our kids fail, they drop out of school. Now we've got to ensure that more and more of our children remain in schools. And we've got to ask ourselves better. And, we've got to constantly, as a community, as citizens, as people who love this country, make sure that we are holding our public representatives accountable and we deliver on the mandate that Parliament has. So as I wrap up, Parliament has now begun its second quarter, after the first quarter was defined really by configuration of government. Now we go into an interesting period where questions to ministers are coming up, questions to the president. If you've got suggestions for questions, please send them through. This is your government. You are represented in Parliament. So we will be engaged in that and we'll continue the fight. As you know, I've asked all of you to sign our petition for making the sexual offences register public. And as we finish the month of August, let's make sure that all of those people who are committing acts that are heinous, we must make sure they are known publicly. People must know who these people are, because you're not going to hire a nursery school teacher. You're not going to hire a teacher. You can't hire a children's worker, a social worker who is on the sexual offences register and not know that. Now, I've gone, and often I go and apply for this thing. It's 150 Rand and you've got to take fingerprints, the old style. Let's digitize the system. Let's make sure we can get instant results. So that's why this petition begins the story. I hope that as we fight these battles, we can continue. In closing, Joburg. Hey, Dada, I am asking you, you cannot promise people a future of nothing. Please, let's make sure this new administration, whatever the configuration is, deliver, make sure we fix potholes, we keep the lights on in Joburg, we keep the roads safe, and let's build a city that can work for people. And so this new coalition, may it last, but ultimately may it deliver. That's what Joburg needs. Let's catch up on this touch base next time. I'll see you soon. Sharp.